We just decided to do this a few days ago, so it's going to be a pretty basic overview of the kind of work that we've been doing, how we started, and then kind of going to pose some questions about moving forward and, yeah, kind of maybe do a brainstorming session with the group.
We do tend to run our workshops very conversationally. So there's a bit of information that we're going to go through about the work and one of our main projects, but feel free to engage as we're going through it as well. Yeah, with that said.
Maybe just a quick background.
Yeah.
I have a social sciences background.
My background is in astrophysics and science communication.
I think this is the first. Oh yeah.
I like that logo up there. That's awesome.
Yeah, my sister designed it for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, Uncommon Cosmos is the initiative that we created a few years ago now, and it started from our time within a space industry education setting. So with the International Space University, we were both teaching associates for one of their space studies programs. I was in the humanities department and you were in the human performance in space. And basically, although Casey had already been involved in space industry for a little bit and astrophysics, we were kind of thrown into this area of like the inside of the space industry and what that looks like. And we're quite confronted by it in a lot of ways, especially from a social sciences background. It's very uncritical, I suppose. And we're really, quite shocked by the way in which a lot of the narratives that exist within the space industry just get thrown out there and exist without being deconstructed or critiqued, and are used kind of unknowingly a lot of the time. And this can even just be like taglines that are used and the way in which people understand space exploration. Does anyone have any taglines that they've heard about space exploration or the space industry that have been like
some common phrases that are often used or terms? Or
the final frontier.
The final frontier. That's
the Wild West, like the new Wild West is the one that gets used a lot.
Yeah.
The old Occupy Mars always.
We're getting a t-shirt.
Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't think they should have.
Yeah, and that's kind of the conquest.
The conquest.
Conquest of space.
Yeah. A lot of colonial narratives.
Yes.
And as we all know, narratives aren't just the way in which we speak, they inform our practices and therefore the activities of the space industry. And the space industry is a booming industry now, as you would know. And you go.
I guess this was something that became very evident for us in this process and in this experience was not only are we witnessing all these colonial frameworks, but it's happening within a exceptionally expanding industry. In the sense that there are space activities that are happening now that are unprecedented, whether it's space tourism or the commercialization of space, where there are new actors in the space realm, in the space industry realm, that have a lot of influence. So it's being directed and it's expanding, but it's being driven by these narratives, these dominant narratives. And there isn't, or what we witnessed, is there wasn't much critical thought within that, or conversation, as you mentioned, Dwayne, to, well, should we do it this way? What are the alternative ways to do it? Who are we not including, and how are we not including people in this? And what are other opinions, voices, experiences exist within space exploration that just aren't existing in the realm that we were in.
Yeah, that last point kind of, I think, centers a lot of the work that we have been doing, especially because, space exploration, the space industry is such an international project, really. And you do have so many different international countries, but also voices, but it's a particular type of voice that is heard that tends to perpetuate sort of Western rhetorics. Obviously, that's not the entirety of it, but that is quite dominant in the creating and the undertaking that the space industry is existing within. So one of the things we wanted to do was support voices that aren't heard within the space industry. And we've kind of now found ourselves within three spheres: academia, and which is conferences and writing papers and doing research; within the industry, which is more conferences, but as well places like the International Space University, IAC, and just kind of having a foot in the industry. And it's quite a small network, to be honest, which, yeah, is interesting seeing as though it's such a big industry. And then the community. Community is really important, because the other thing is so much is happening in the space industry, and it affects us in so many different ways. The way in which we socialize and mitigate our lives every day is dictated by space technologies. Yet a lot of the community and the public don't know about how space technologies impact us and influence us, and then as well don't have a voice within it. Any other things on that point?
Can I just ask something real quick?
Yes.
Yeah.
So has this been like a recent thing that you've been seeing, this kind of shift to like this very narrative driven like effects in space industry? Or has this been something that you've like noticed has been happening for a while, like going back like several decades?
Well, I think look at the space race, right? Like that is so narrative driven. I think when we talk about something like space exploration, it's sort of almost innately coupled with some kind of human narrative about why we choose to do something as big and profound as exploring space. And in the past, it's been tied with military ventures, right? And I don't think a lot of that has left, even though it's shifted and changed. And so I haven't been in the space industry long enough to know what we haven't been in long enough to know what maybe some of the more like decadal changes have been. But in light of new space, which is the commercialization of space, there is, really like strong narratives of extraction, exploitation, the claiming of celestial bodies for essentially for profit or for human endeavor, and then somewhere in there is the scientific research.
So more it's like a commercial shift into space almost.
Explicitly.
Yeah.
At least the last 10 years, most major space programs have been pushed to be fully commercial, including us.
Yeah.
Even though it's not yet. There's not the money over here. The US one very much is. It's trying very hard to do it.
Yeah, and then with that you have like national and then commercial ties, and kind of the main way of doing that is like through commercial entities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so I think the assuming everyone knows about the Artemis missions are followed from Apollo, but there's been huge accusations between China, Russia, America saying that's not at all about space even, it's just political power moves, soft power. Obviously there is more to it than just that, but even despite it being led by governments, it is still mostly private companies.
Yeah.
That are building.
You look at a lot of NASA missions, they're all private, rockets are all private.
Yeah.
Contracts.
I think that one of the big takeaways for us that whilst this is happening, where it's also resulting in technological changes or growth that is impacting our daily lives. So like, for example, mega constellations is a really like direct example of that. You know, it's like since the establishment of mega constellations, not only is it, impacting us in the technology that we have access to, but there's a real lack in like regulation. So we're congesting LEO, but then also we're brightening the night sky. So these practices are sort of going ahead at a rapid rate, faster than the critical conversation or thought or policy legislation. And it also has an impact on our everyday life.
Yeah.
To a degree. Shall we move on?
Yeah, so a big part of this is the fact that a lot of us, unless you're embedded or have a specific interest in the space industry and space exploration, we don't know what's happening in the industry, how we're affected. So a lot of what we do is actually just like public workshops and events. These can be general talks and discussions that are just like sharing knowledge. You'd be surprised about the, I guess, lack of knowledge that people have, even just explaining what an artificial satellite is, how we use it, and how that impacts our daily lives. A big part as well is sort of thinking about space futures and imagining different sorts of space futures. For me, I think both of us, this is a really important aspect because of these narratives and the way in which we understand and conceptualize space exploration is so limited and so bound to the colonial practices and frameworks and histories that we have here on Earth, that just this perpetuation that that's what we're going to do on space, but that does not need to be the reality at all. There's so many different relationships with space, and there's so many different potentials that exist in terms of our futures, and I think space exploration can actually be a really amazing canvas to imagine those collectively, that is adherent and in relationship with culture and relationship with the land and with the sky. So that's a fun one. And we've done these as well with space studies programs and doing sort of deconstructing narratives and then thinking about space futures. And so people within the industry as well, like, how do we think about our space future differently? I think some people can kind of get a bit like, what do you mean? Like, this is what it is, and that's how we imagine it to be, sort of, you know, through the Artemis Accords and building a particular style of a lunar base and a Mars colony. Yeah, they're just very much so dictated by a certain imagination, and science fiction has a big role in that. So the arts is so important. About demilitarizing space, the military is very much so embedded within the space industry. Do stuff on dark and quiet skies, and as well they tend to be quite like casual, but something we've started this summer and Prem has come on board is we're running night walks. So we're doing a series of them, some in Melbourne and then in peri-urban spots, just like an hour out of Melbourne. And this is just a chance for all of us to connect to the night sky and go on a night walk and understand light pollution in our local area, and then hopefully compare that to not as polluted areas, and literally just have time to sit with the sky and sort of build our relationship with it.
We had our first one of this last week. Was it 2 weeks ago? And upon leaving, some of the participants mentioned that they hardly ever look at the night sky. Like, this was an opportunity for them to not only be out in sort of like a quiet space, but like in the darkness of the night, but have a facilitated environment to look at the night sky, which they otherwise wouldn't have done.
Where did you guys host this?
In Darabin Parkland. So like a really light polluted night sky as well.
Terrible sky.
Great cranes.
There's more coming up. Maybe we'll do a plug at the end.
Yeah, and it'd be as well like the way in which, especially for the public workshops, like really try to confront the hierarchies of knowledge that exist kind of in academia and industry, and be like, we have knowledge, but like would love for anyone to come and share, and even participants to share, and just, you know, even for ourselves living, I was lucky that I didn't grow up in the city and had rural skies, but here, like, I look at the sky way less than I do at home. And yeah, recognizing that I'm also trying to connect to the night sky here and sort of make this more of a collective effort. We do artist collaborations as well, and done some things on the radio. And then the other big part is doing research. And a cool part about, well, an important part about centering the community within our work is the community engagement that's happened and sort of the awareness that's taken place but then meeting people through different communities that are impacted by the space industry. And that's kind of where this research has come out of. So this is what we presented this week at the conference, but the social and cultural impacts of rocket-related infrastructure. There's some research on it, but it's not a well-researched area. But yeah, this came from us being connected with an elder through other people that we met in a community. So it wasn't necessarily this thing of like, we're gonna look at this, but kind of, yeah, came to us in those ways.
Right, clunky animation. Yeah, so there are 3 points on this map that you can see. There's one that's Kaniba Test Range, there's Bayak up the top, and Rocket Lab. So a lot of the work that we've been, I guess, centering on recently is the fact that both historically, but again, even more so now, where we've had the establishment of rocket-related infrastructure, whether that's test ranges, launch sites, on Indigenous lands, and at the consequence of First Nations people being able to practice culture, and directly disrupting ways of life. As Harry said, we were put in touch with a senior Gugada elder named Auntie Sue through the work that we do. And this sort of, put us on the trajectory of researching this and finding out about multiple sites where this is an issue. So we're just going to spend the next little bit of time talking about 3 of the main sites where we've been looking at or working with people for. So the first one is the Kaniba Test Range, and this is on Gugada country in South Australia. And it's operated by a company called Southern Launch. And I want to, I guess, mention that a lot of what we're communicating today is Auntie Sue's story. So this is the experience of Auntie Sue as being a elder out here, and what her experience has been with Southern Launch and with the test range. But in essence, Southern Launch consulted with the Kaniba Aboriginal Corporation, and through that process, there were different offerings. As it says there, the community were offered Wi-Fi, there were scholarships, quad bikes, promises of jobs, and so on. And this was actually quite well received and enjoyed by the Kaniba community. One of the conversations that has emerged since is, I guess, the using of a typical colonial tool, which is leveraging artificial states of poverty. And we'll actually see this in some of the other cases as well, where and across other industries too, where offerings are made, whether it's technological or critical infrastructure or resources are offered to areas or communities or groups of people who, as a byproduct of the colonial legacy, don't have access to or are not afforded access to. So this is a conversation that has happened in light of the consultation process here. And there's been continuing and ongoing consultation with the between Southern Launch and the Kaniba community, the corporation. But throughout this, Auntie Sue was not involved in the consultation. And one thing that was not explicit through this process is the defence contracts that Southern Launch will have. So there was a real lack of transparency there. And essentially what this has resulted in is Auntie Sue's access to ancestral lands to practice culture, perform cultural duties, such as cleaning rock holes, maintaining land, maintaining sacred sites, is actually being quite inhibited at the moment. But beyond that, there have been several instances where she has been out on country with some family members and extended community during rocket activity or like a launch or return activity. And so in some of those cases, there's been communication from Southern Launch that has provided like schedules, times, locations, and so on. But in two of the more recent cases, that hasn't happened. And one of them being a return of a capsule from space that was landing on the test range, whilst Anisu and a group of people were cleaning rock holes. And this is a huge risk. This can be quite threatening. And then there was a really recent situation, I think just like maybe last week or the week before, which was similar. That cultural duties were being performed, and I believe there was a launch.
It was launched yesterday.
Yes. Yeah. Which they were off country at that point. But again, no communication. It was essentially just hearsay about whether or not something was happening. And so not only is it an inability to perform cultural duties and continue cultural practice on country, but it's when that is happening, there's a huge risk. Anisu also talks a lot about like the risks to sacred sites being damaged, the impact on wildlife and ecology, and kind of the community division that she feels is occurring right now, particularly in relation to the militarization of the land, or the military like operations that are being connected as an area that has a history of fallout from previous military testing. Earlier this year, she wrote up an official statement of no consent, and if anyone wants access to that, we can provide access to that. That was delivered to Southern Launch and to companies that they have contracts with across the globe, sort of just communicating how she feels and her stance on all of this. So this is an ongoing thing, and something that requires, ongoing conversation. But it's happening right now, and it's particularly heightened. Is there anything that you want to add to that before we talk about Maya?
Maybe just something that would be relevant for this group is like one of the important aspects that Anisu's maintaining and caring for is sacred sites related to the Seven Sisters story, and is a senior elder in caring for those sites. And there's kind of this question of like, if there's a return and it hits a site, what does that mean? And how do you reverse that damage? You can't really. And I think another point maybe didn't start with, but as we all know within this group, like the land and sky aren't separated as it tends to be understood within the space industry. And this thing of like, we tend to think about just the sky within the space industry and space exploration, but so much happens on the land as well, and how land impacts sky and sky impacts land, and that relationship. And I think that's something that's really needs to be understood within these contexts, in an industry context. So another case we've been looking into and been talking to people on the ground is over Mahia Peninsula in Aotearoa, down on the North Island, East Coast, below Gisborne. And here is Launch Complex 1 by Rocket Lab. It was established in 2016, first launch in 2017. from the conversations that we've had and what we've been told, like the consultation went well and everyone was really excited. A lot of things were promised, which included jobs and sort of economic opportunities, but also scholarships for the youth. And that was something that was really exciting for a lot of people, and being able to support education for the younger generation in this area. I don't know if anyone knows Mahia Peninsula, but it's quite isolated. And there were conversations that went on, but basically it was the local council of Hawke's Bay that got the final say and did the land lease to Rocket Lab, which has just been extended, and they've just had approval to manufacture another launch pad, I believe. So what has kind of come out of that nearly 10 years later is that a lot of these promises weren't followed through. And a big part of it as well was not wanting military contracts through Rocket Lab and not wanting the Whenua land to be used for military purposes. However, Rocket Lab hasn't upheld that promise. And then just was also promised that there'd be continual access to the land, and that hasn't been upheld. Rocket Lab has been doing a lot of launches, and obviously with those launches you have restrictions of land. The fishing economy is really important, and waterways have been restricted as well. And as well, the impacts on Wi-Fi through, I don't know how that works. I don't know if someone else knows how that works, but a local was telling us how they were at the local Foursquare getting some food and trying to pay for it, and then there was a rocket being launched and the FPOS machine wasn't working, so they couldn't get their food, and their Wi-Fi always gets disrupted during launches. I don't know if anyone has the maths for that, but that's something that exists. And as well, there's been the noise pollution has been really damaging. There was an anecdote given to us that one of the first launches was near a local's farm and 30 sheep ran off the cliff and killed themselves from being so startled. And what's kind of arisen out of this with Rocket Lab not upholding what was promised is there's been ongoing protests and campaigns, and particularly around the militarization, and that being a real anchor point. Rocket Lab Monitor has emerged. Sonia Smith is one of the key people involved in that. And another part that's important to mention, that the launch pad is located on the sites of the Tupuna, the ancestor of that iwi, Rongo Wahine, and not being able to visit obviously very important cultural sites. And then we have Biak.
So Biak Island is in West Papua, and as maybe some of you know, West Papua is currently under military occupation by the Indonesian government, and currently experiencing a genocide at the hands of. But Biak Island actually has a lot of historical context in this, as a lot of early freedom fighters were born on Biak Island. And so during the occupation around in the 80s, there was a lot of violence to sort of squish it out, particularly here. And currently what's happening with the Indonesian government alongside the LAPAN, or also BRIN, or what was LAPAN but is now BRIN, which is the National Research and Innovation Agency. Also with Roscosmos, which is the Russian space agency, are planning to build a spaceport on Biak Island. The way that this emerged is because in the 80s, Leipan arrived in Biak Island and coerced community members into providing signatures to release the land. The local accounts of this and the reports are that a meeting was held with Leipan to essentially communicate that in the future, at some point in the future, could we maybe do something on your land? And so they held a meeting, and to enter the meeting, they grabbed everyone's signatures for attendance. It was also there was also offers to we'll give you compensation. We'll give you a large sum of money, or what was considered a large sum of money for your land. The political context of this situation is that when landowners said no, they were intimidated because by the military who were there as well, saying, "Oh, you must be associated with the West Papua movement if you don't want to sign over." So some of the landowners accepted money in this situation, but many did not. But signatures were collected, and then it was, I believe, in early 2000s that Leipan arrived back to Biak Island and asked for the land and started clearing, and a lot of the community members were essentially confused, and they have since been protesting. They've but have been met with quite a strong military force in their protests. A lot of the accounts have been about how this is a community of people who heavily rely and depend on their land to not only exist within their cultural realms, but to cultivate food and products, to exist in family dynamics. The land that wants to be cleared is actually one of the forests where the ancestors are and live and exist. So the displacement of by people from this island, from this area, has also been mentioned or what a worry is how that could cause tension with other neighbouring groups. So
Amanda has her hand raised.
oh, we access it from here.
Amanda, you had your hand raised?
Oh, sorry. I was going to wait till the end, but I just wanted to talk about the Australian case, because there is probably some legislation you guys could focus and help them on in terms of it's affecting ongoing tradition with Aboriginal cultures. There's a federal act that you can appeal to that can get stop works and things put into place. So it's the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Protection Act. So I can have a chat to you guys if you'd like to get a bit more information about that and what they might be able to do. But it has stopped projects even with all of the approvals in place before in Victoria, and the federal minister can come in and put a stop emergency stop works out.
That would be great. Yeah, love to chat about that. Thanks, Amanda.
Sorry, before I forgot, that's why I put the hand up. So
no, that'd be very, very useful. I guess one of the last things to mention here, or to read, is a quote from Martha Albright about what it would mean to be removed from this land. So a lot of the questions that we've been asking is whether, regardless if it's established rocket-related infrastructure or it's about to be built, it's very evident that that the space sector sort of operates as business as usual without really kind of recognizing the impacts of rocket-related infrastructure on people's ways of life. And there are some common themes and some common tools that are being used, like the lack of transparency in consultation, particularly with military contracts and associations. the like coercion, leveraging sort of states of living, particularly economic states, and leveraging that for consultation. So we're seeing these themes that, quite directly colonial tactics. Even though these are more recent cases, this isn't a new thing. One of the main spaceports is the Guana Space Center. I think SpaceX largely operates out of, or like some of the launches operate out of Pachuca, Kodiak Island, Bakuno, I'm saying that correctly. And there is literature about all of these sites.
Not heaps about Kazakhstan, it's more local stuff.
Yeah, so not, that's like particularly about like locals.
Yeah.
And the disruption to way of life. But it's, I guess this is also the point, like that it's heavily under-researched. There's not many people looking into the impacts of rocket-related infrastructure. And it's particularly concerning as there are plans for more infrastructure to be built.
And more launches. Yeah. So do you have any final things to say after that? And then we wanted to move it to the room. So this is the work that we've been doing, and this is ongoing and might be forever. But like seriously, these are big industries and it's big work. But something we really wanted to take this time as well is kind of to see what you all think and ways of moving forward and going about doing research and working with communities. I just put some thoughts and questions that I had like 30 minutes before coming in here. I guess does anyone have any questions about the research actually before we go into this? I don't know how to check online. You're monitoring it. No? A question that I have is kind of, I think, maybe it's obvious, but also I think it's something that'd be really good to be teased out. Is there a question? Jack.
Sorry, do you have you guys developed any methodology for actually quantifying like the impact that rockets have within community, or is it more of like a discussion with the community elders and the community members to see how they feel personally about it?
It's more being discussional. We've done environmental impacts previously, but it's been more discussional and building relationships, and just sometimes it's phone calls and checking in, and then just trying to use our platform to raise awareness, but haven't necessarily built like, here's a methodology for doing this, and then the quantitative and qualitative impacts, but that could be something moving forward.
I'm a bit skeptical about that at the moment, because one of my gut feelings is that those companies actually do a quantification and then say, oh, this site is the one that we can just exploit with the least bit of trouble. So you get into this kind of game, yes, how much are they allowed to do? And that kind of negotiation, which I don't think is any way fruitful.
There's an interesting documentary that potentially is going to come out soon called Native Tidal Rockets, and talks a lot about Anisu's experience, and one of the I think this sort of relates to what you're saying. If it doesn't, apologies, but one of the themes that is explored is about the right to say no. And that when approached by an organization or a company under native title, is that how much is there a right to say no? Or is it just negotiations, And if that is the case, what can be approved there, you know.
The other thing is, well, in terms of this question is like the case of Mahia, Rocket Lab doesn't allow people to come in and do independent research. So they've been calling for even just like research on the impacts on the waterways and environmental and impacts on the land, and Rocket Lab won't let any independent researchers come in to show that there are very obvious impacts. Like I think you know that before you even establish a rocket launch site that there are going to be impacts. But yeah, that's a way of controlling it, is like we don't allow it, and then they control the narrative.
And actually, at the Canoever Test Range, there's been no environmental impact statement done.
Right.
Oh. There's been at Whalers Way, which is another site they have. They've recently gotten approval, but there's been
Which company is behind that site, sorry?
Southern Launch.
Yep.
Southern Launch.
You got a pointed question at the conference, didn't you?
I did get a pointed question. I got the question of, I can't fully remember it. I think I was in like presenter mode, like, but what was it like? It was kind of this question of like, how long have you been involved and how do you know?
In a relationship with
Yeah.
Southern Launch.
Yeah. This.
And
Do-
about
is that
Yeah, it's
you?
kind of questioning how long you've been there, how much do you really know about this, how long have you been engaged with this?
Yeah. Which is, yeah, it definitely felt like a question of like trying to trip me up. a bit.
Discredit you?
Pardon?
Was it like feeling like it was trying to discredit you?
A little bit.
In a very passive aggressive way, it was sort of like, well, how long have you been, it wasn't put in the same tone, but the subtext was, well, how long have you been in there, how do you really know all this, you know, and the look you got was very.
And this is, well, in terms of the case in the Canoever case, is like there are tensions within the communities and there are different opinions, and some of the local mob are working with Southern Launch and it's going well, but then you have the other side, Ani Suna family, where it isn't going well. And I think the way in which Southern Launch, and this isn't to discredit as well the mob that, you know, wants it there and is collaborating, but it's this thing of like whose voices do get heard in the story, and the way in which Southern Launch has really promoted how great their collaboration has been.
Yeah.
And you go to, like at IAC, they had their booth was this like video simulation. You put on this jacket, like vibrates, and it was like, you know, the rockets going off. They literally sound like bombs. And local kids like running around, and it was like, oh, look at all the great collaboration we've done. It's like, you know, then there's the other side of the story. But there's been a lot of intimidation tactics that have taken place towards Ani Su and Southern Launch leveraging tensions within communities and the politics within communities, and yeah, setting them against one another. So I think that's as well like these pointed questions of like, do you actually know what's going on, is I think one of these things of like people trying to discredit Ani Su's voice.
And
Which, yeah.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, exactly.
Divide and conquer.
And I think that's part of the playbook, which, you know, in many ways can be considered as land acquisition, right? This is what's happening, and it's happened, like, you know, there are many different cases of this that are within astronomy, within observatories and telescopes. So again, like not whether the like, you know, the details are really important, but where we're talking about like a practice that is ongoing of acquiring land for, you know, space or astronomy, and the practices and the ways that are being done are coming with harmful impacts, right? So it's like, okay, well, how do we look at that? And how do we actually sit down and have conversations around that? And whilst bolster the situations where it has been a really good case, you know, best practice, and something to celebrate. Like, what about the times in which it isn't? And what is there to learn there?
Yeah, so one of the questions I have is, what responsibility do we have within like cultural astronomy research and this group, I suppose, in shaping practices within the space sector? Because I think this is something that feels there is such a disconnect. Maybe not.
Amanda? You mute yourself?
I thought I would jump in while Harriet's asking the question. I thought I'd jump in with a different query just relating to what you said before. But it was, have you done a comparison with the mining acquisition of land, especially in traditional country, and the processes that they've done? Because what you've described, mining companies do left, right, and centre, and still do and have done historically. And there's been quite obviously a lot of publication about some of that, especially when Juukan Gorge was destroyed and things like that. So yeah, there could be quite a lot of material there potentially to pull from as a comparative. Because yeah, I've worked up in a lot of remote communities where they've said, oh, they promised us this and they said they'd do that. And, you know, we get training, we get education opportunities, we get jobs. And then push comes to shove, nobody gets any training, nobody gets any jobs. They get paid a once-off payment of $1 million that has to be split between 15 families. And then they're left high and dry and their country is being destroyed. So it's happened so many times, especially in Queensland and WA. But yeah, in terms of, if there's a good example of that, there's probably not that many, but in terms of best practice, so.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because yeah, this happens across industries. And I think this has been something that's been felt quite important learning more about Mahia, is like this has been happening since 2016 and the local community is now seeing the effects of this. And yeah, I've been in conversations where unrelated, just at Huey's, and someone from there was like, we were promised all these things and now that hasn't gone through and now we just want them like off our land. Yeah, and this happens in different industries. It's just like very few cases of it, I guess, being research in the space industry. So drawing from the minings.
I mean, on that point, like, are there any connections, but like, who are the people that these companies are hiring to do these negotiations? I mean, are they getting them from mining companies or from
I done that quite extensively when I was working in Arakoon with the Big Way mob, and that's kind of often what Amanda and I do here in Victoria. It's something we could probably deliver a whole other lecture on. It's not something I reckon we could cover off in 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But when you ask the question, is there any way for them to say no under native title? I'm not so entirely sure about that, but there is very little way under the state legislation in Victoria, for example, in New South Wales, for traditional owners to say no.
Yeah.
And that it can't go ahead. So they're often unwilling participants in the approvals processes.
Yeah, and this is the thing as well, like native title is the lowest form of property rights in Australia. And yeah, kind of communities get put in these positions of like, well, if it's going to happen, how do we try and support ourselves and get something out of it?
I think there was a very apt comment in this earlier where it's like, if they get offered anything, it's usually like you were saying, like Wi-Fi or like these things that are only necessary because of colonial impacts already. So they've suffered because of colonial impacts, and then more colonial impacts are occurring, but it's being offset by, oh look, we're giving you all this, when it's just exacerbate. It's a problem they've caused, and they want to cause more problems by, and there's no, it's the, I don't know.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, but it's the thing, why aren't basic services ensured that communities all have by the government? Like that should be the government's role. And
it should be the minimum. It shouldn't be this like benefit that they're getting for giving up their own like land and their own legacy.
But you were saying having the companies offer them things the government should be providing.
Yeah, and the way in which that's leveraged, and that should be just basic services at all communities.
Yeah, things that people in well-resourced parts of Australia would just take for granted, right? Like access to these things.
And now we have so many satellites. But that's another conversation, I guess. But yeah, I guess one of these things of like the way in which the space industry particularly does not know much about cultural astronomy and astronomy in general. You'd be surprised how little people within the space industry knows about the sky and knows about space. And I think this, yeah, particularly in this group and kind of doing this work, it's like understanding the importance of sky, like sky knowledge, and the connection between the two. And I think I see this group and the research that's happening here is a really potentially influential thing that can be taken to the space industry. I know, whatever else thoughts.
I've experienced some very harsh commentary by people in that sector.
Yeah.
Likewise.
No, one of them is even an Aboriginal scholar working in that sector. Well, I don't care about the planets and their motions. I don't care about astronomy. That doesn't interest me. All I care about is space stuff. I don't know if it was a lack of interest about what the connections are between space and astronomy, or just well, if you pay attention to actually read my thing, you can see that I only care about space. I don't care about planets and their motions and astrophysics and stuff like that. That's not what I was asking you, but like that's something I've seen commonly across a lot of parts of the space sector, and even in the astronomy sector. We're doing astronomy, but we don't care about space stuff. Space is too local for them. Like anything between here and the moon, whatever, that's your backyard. We only care about your galactic stuff. Like there's this sort of gatekeeping about the difference between space and astronomy. I'm not actually surprised that they know so little about each other.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just a bunch of astrologers anyway.
Well,
I actually had a conversation once with a professor in cosmology, and it was after learning about plans for setting up habitats on the moon and mining the poles. And I think I was in a state of sort of just, that was the first time that I was hearing that this was a legitimate plan. And I was speaking to this cosmologist, being like, oh my gosh, like what are we going to do? Like, how do you feel about this? And the response was sort of, oh, well, that's the space industry people, they're gonna do what they're gonna do, and we're here to research space. And I was like, isn't it all the same? Like, aren't we all involved in the sort of the same world? So I think there's a lot of disconnection between, again, like those sort of three bubbles in the beginning, between industry, between academia, and between the public and people. It's like, okay, cool, well, how can we bring this all together in ways like this?
But yeah, I mean, to answer that question, I mean, I'm sort of at the more skeptical end, I guess. But I mean, I think one of the things that that I feel that the space industry gets away with is that there's just this pervasive feeling amongst lots of people in the community of the space industry. Oh, that's about like, the future and holodecks and survival of the, sort of humanity. It's like, it's a commercial business. It's like an industry. And, I mean, I would say that we, but lots of people have the responsibility to just be very clear-eyed about it. I mean, sure, we can talk about the benefits of the space industry, but being very clear-eyed about the fact that it's a business, it's a commercial business that operates in particular ways, and, sometimes with these kinds of, sort of disregard for people's rights in the interests of profit.
Yeah, I think there's as well like multiple narratives I've noticed in terms of like people being like, oh, it's space industry or it's space. I think that even happens on a public level as well, and this kind of going into the gatekeeping nature of the space industry. But even, narratives like it's rocket science, like, oh, that's too complex. Like my mom does this a lot of just anything space and she just switches off. Just, that's too complex and numbers start getting thrown out. When that's not really reality and you actually start talking about it and people are like, oh yeah, and start to understand it. But I feel like the space industry, I don't know, kind of jumps on those narratives a little bit, and like their outreach feels, I don't know, maybe this is biased, but doesn't feel like actually genuine. A lot of ways it's just like, here are the benefits of space in like these very sort of simple ways. I had another point. I think actually it's interesting the role that satellites is having on bridging these disciplines and bridging these conversations within cultural astronomy, within the public. Even we notice this on the night walks, people being like, oh wow, and start counting the satellites and realizing how many there are. And then in the space industry, obviously they're putting more satellites up, but then, you know, the Kessler syndrome and the potential of us creating a shield around ourselves, this concern starting to go across different areas. And I'm wondering like whether this similar thing, like how satellites are bringing us all into this conversation and realizing that this is quite a relevant and very on active case, but as well like broadening that, and I guess that's what we're trying to do, that this goes beyond just satellites and things in orbit and things that we see to on the land as well. I don't know where I was going with that sort, but it's popped up.
What was it, the syndrome, Kessler syndrome?
Kessler.
Okay. And so that's like, what is that exactly?
I feel like you're gonna explain it better than me.
Can I?
There are multiple people in the room that could,
Yeah.
We can all chime in, yeah, like,
I could do it, but.
Good question, because
well, I'll do my best, and if anyone wants to chime in, go for it. But essentially, it's based off the fact that low Earth orbit is really congested with both defunct satellites, active satellites, and debris. That the chance or the probability of a collision that ends up ricocheting and causing like a mass collision event is not unprobable, and that if it did, it could be quite a catastrophic event. That's essentially what it is.
Gotcha. Okay.
Like a domino effect. You hit one satellite, there's lots of fragments out. They hit others, and all of a sudden you've taken a few objects and created thousands.
Large.
And now we're latent.
Access greater space because there's a shield.
Yeah. Cause it like trapping us in our own bubble.
Yes.
But also I think the satellites might quite a useful topic, because as far as you can see, the only way that these topics get into a public conversation, space debris is one of the few that people actually understand. Oh, actually, we're doing the same kind of environmental pollution up there that we did down here, and maybe
Even talking about like the orbiting satellites and stuff is something that people understand and get shocked at.
And it's interesting how few people I feel are actually aware of the problem of satellites. Like you mentioned how some people never look at the night sky. And I find so often like walking around with friends at night and I look up and say like, oh, there's another satellite. And they're like, wow, you can see satellites? Like, what do you mean? Like people aren't even aware that they can see satellites from Earth. Whereas it's just because for us in the know, it's like such a big problem.
Yeah, that's what we were.
So the main hook here is more programs of what you were doing, getting people outside, looking up, connecting and realizing what it is. And I think with these conferences, it's one of the frustrating things about it. The people who need to hear it the most are the ones that are never in the sessions you have. So in astrophysics, what we did with a conference we did almost 2 years ago now on transient astronomy is we knew that if we had parallel sessions and indigenous was going to be one, that it might get attended, it might not, but the people who were going to be in the rooms, it's kind of preaching to the choir, they're the ones who are going to get it.
Yeah.
So we decided, well, the conference is going to have parallel sessions, but the first session of the entire conference is going to be not a parallel session, a required one. It's going to be purely on indigenous knowledges at the very beginning of the whole astrophysics conference. Therefore, you can't just sort of like weasel your way out. I don't care about that. Like everybody, we one step away from sort of shoving it down their throat. Like you need to get in here and hear this stuff because this is important. And it worked. It was really important. You know, it was really, really valuable in that regard. I mean, some people aren't going to listen, but I think finding these hooks and these avenues of getting the people who need to hear it. So one thing that I've talked with local astronomy groups about is they said, oh, well, we've invited local Aboriginal community to be involved, but nothing's ever happened. I said, did you invite them for a specific event and then give them free access to it? Or did you just say, come join us sometime? Did you offer them free membership for a year? Did you say, look, if you want to come and talk to us, we'll pay you. And, you know, we'll pay for your travel as well if you wanna come do that. And if you bring your family, we're gonna give everybody in your family or the community free membership for a year. Like, that would go so much further than just saying, oh yeah, we'd like to know if one of your people wanna come out and talk to us sometime. Well, who is that going to serve? Who's that gonna benefit? So the space sector, I think maybe having to go through and take out the people who are gonna be the decision makers
Yeah.
to do that.
This reminds me of, I think last year maybe, IAC was kind of having a similar conversation, some Australian in the space sector. And he was like, yeah, I emailed the local mob to use their name for my company, never heard from them, and so I just gave up. It was like the end of the conference, and I was like, I'm out. But I was like, yeah, okay, this is what we're working with a lot of the time.
Why do you think it is like this? Is it a lack of education, or is it a lack of like believing that they like, what is causing it for companies and for, do they not want to put the effort into engaging with Indigenous mobs, or do they not understand?
I mean, I think there's so many.
Optics are important for them because if they get to look at they're doing something without doing it. I don't know, I jumped in front of it, sorry, but.
I also just think there's such a huge disconnection in like public and the night sky that includes people working in companies like this. Just wouldn't even come to think of it to begin with. Like, I don't know, the night walks, I think as someone who's been in the space thing my whole life, I think it kind of surprised me that people knew nothing about, like, zero. And I was just like, I know a little bit, and compared to them, they're just like, oh, I'm so surprised by the stories we all knew. Like, actually, people don't know enough to even start considering that as a problem.
Yeah.
But why do companies do it?
Well, this is the commercial is one. Also, like in the context of Australia, it's a colonial state. Like our education is awful. It's a very racist country, and like, yeah, a lot of it is just for optics. A lot of time, if it does happen, and for a lot of people, they don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
To be honest, like, I don't know. Maybe it's a bit blunt.
No, that's a fun point.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know, maybe a little bit disenfranchised, but these companies are making so much money, right? They're making a lot of money, and there's a lot of money to be made in space. So when you want to continue with business as usual and make sure that your company does what it set out to do, which is be a leading space company, and whilst knowing in this day and age what is the appropriate and responsible things to do in terms of community engagement, you're going to do that. Are you going to do that in a way that addresses some of the colonial contexts and complexities within that? Probably not. It probably is going to be an optics thing.
Yeah.
So and I don't want to say that in a way that diminishes consultation that has happened in a really wonderful and collaborative way, because that has happened. But yeah, there are other broader things to think about that feed into this situation as well.
A lot of commercial companies like to do the bare minimum, so whatever is legislatively required, and that's it, and they've ticked their box. And that's that whole consultation versus collaboration. Like as you said, Casey, some companies do the collaboration really well, but most just take an idea to a group and say, this is what we want to do. What do we have to do this? And it's the cost benefit analysis. Like I mentioned Jook and Gorge before. I spoke to a man I work with who's a social, he kind of does the dollar value of like social outcomes. And so he said that there was $100 million worth of iron ore under that 40,000-year-old rock shelter that they decided to blow up. And they figured that amount of cash and income was well worth destroying an extremely rare Aboriginal site, and that they'd asked for years to get it to be preserved, and it just didn't happen. And then they ended up losing $200 million because by the time it was made public and everybody became aware of it, they ended up losing a whole host of like engagement, and like a lot of their shares got sold off and things like that. So they lost twice as much as what they would have made. So,
wow.
I think as well what's coming to mind here is like even the term and practice of consultation is so fraught, and like what it really needs to be is like collaborative and led. I think tough hockey is a good example. I don't know if you know.
Yep.
Yeah, you probably know more about it than I do.
Maybe. So it's in the South Island, and it's a collaboration with the people of the land there. So instead of consultative, they've got actual kind of voting rights within the operations of the site. So they've got kind of test flight facilities, a landing strip, all these different things that different companies can rent out and use as well if they're developing different technologies that they're trying to get access into the space sector. One of the wins, I guess, was they were wanting to set up as a second launch site, and they did their consultation, and the people actually said no, so it's not a launch site at the moment. And they said we can revisit it later. And one of the really cool things is that they said that we're going to buy this area and we're going to supply you with money in order to improve the ecological value of it instead of diminishing it by us doing our research here. So it's they've actually improved the biodiversity within the area surrounding the testing facility. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretend to be defunded under the current government, but but they did some cool stuff, and they're still locked in yet.
What was that site called?
Tāwhaki. So Tāwhaki is one of our ancestors who in our tribal histories ascended to the heavens in search of knowledge. So, you know, name alone. I'd make the comment that all of our case studies, all of them were location based, except for the one in Mahia where it said, you know, LC1A bracket rocket lab. You know, so it's a very stark difference. So here's our launch site, rocket lab, not even a mention of Mahia in the name, versus naming that after, you know, Māori history. Not even just location.
And with the establishment of Tāwhaki, do you know if like who kind of, I can't remember the names of the people involved, but was it like proposed to the local iwi and then they built it together, like, and with Kopapa?
South Island is pretty easy because there's, except for at the very top, it's one iwi, Ngaitahu. So it's in collaboration with them. I've met with the director who's also part of the board of Ngaitahu. So they're very businessy down there, but they also got their business people in Tāwhaki and named roles specifically created for them. Yeah,
and like what I've kind of seen, like we heard David talk at IAC and then just kind of, some conversations and on their websites, but don't know heat, but like, the real embedment of Māori kaupapa and ways of doing it, and even with the whenua and like not revitalization, but like putting energy and money into the land is so important. Really excited to see what happens there. But it also goes to show that there are different possibilities. Like it is a different scenario.
I think this is one of, I guess maybe a bit of like a takeaway for this session is that it's like there are different ways to go about, the building of or the engagement. Not necessarily the building of sites, but the engagement with space exploration through these means, and that through these cases. And like we've learned that there is a need for to build best practice, and perhaps that's where people who have been working and researching within cultural astronomy can help, right? Or have a part to play, because as we've already said so much already, like an expanding space industry, but a juvenile one, in many ways. So therein lies an opportunity to work on best practice methods, whatever that may look like, because that doesn't really exist right now in this domain. And yeah, how can people within cultural astronomy participate in that? If at all.
Is that rhetorical or not rhetorical?
It's for people to decide.
I think, yeah, it's also brings forward sort of like the trajectory of space exploration and our relationship with space. This can seem quite abstract in space industry sense, but I don't think necessarily abstract in this context of like, even the way we conceptualize what space exploration is so narrow. And yeah, I think that's something really worth interrogating as well, and kind of how do we, yeah, I know, I suppose it's thinking about alternatives, and those alternatives exist, but at the same time needing to stop the machine, which is an imperial machine of the space industry, but kind of the different sectors that exist.
And I would assume, especially now, like with, like if you would look back like to when like space exploration really became popular, it was like different countries pushing out, like you have Russia and the US, but now it's different companies. It's become so broken up. There's almost now a veil over how do you get to the root problem? Well, it's hard because it's so broken up. There's so many different companies. There's so many different actors in the field now that it's hard to say this, you can't just say the US is causing these problems. It's like now all these different variations. And so it's now hard to find where that root problem is, or that is what I would assume from someone who's just assuming things about like what the industry looks like.
In terms of actually putting things into space, there's less than 100 globally. So I thought that was a pretty reasonable number for a sector. And if you look at kind of like market share, it becomes even more simple.
But to your point, the things are still the same. You know, you only have to look at the rhetoric that comes out of Australia, just to pick on our own country. You know, it's a childlike thing, but it's the same as the Americans and Russians were doing in the 1958, 59, when they launched the first things. It was chest beating and wanting to be part of the big club of people who can put things into space.
Yeah.
And you know, it's no different. You've got India, you've got a number of other countries that are desperately trying to be big people. Own nuclear weapons, put things in space. Good, then you're a big country. So you can change the narrative here in Australia, because ours is still about generating income. So it's no different to mining. You know, we've got some of the biggest and dirtiest mining companies in the world operating out of Australia, and things operating all around the world. So it's a matter of, from how the trajectory is, you could actually influence that in Australia by influencing local politicians. It's not only just Indigenous populations that need to think about it. It's us. How do we want our Australian industry to be? Do we want it to be part of just another colonial enterprise just because we've been colonised? Or do we want it to actually be something useful to humanity? Then you can start trying to do that on a local scale. I don't know what that means, but it's not just a thing that someone else has to worry about.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because the research that I've been a part of is like there's the usual suspects, US, China, Russia, India, and then the fifth most prolific launching country is New Zealand.
Yeah.
So it's like a tiny, we always do the per capita analysis and we look great. And Tom brings up the per capita analysis of sheep and we don't look that good. But I think there's two sides of that play, where if you can impact locally, nationally, space policy, best practice of protocols, especially with our revitalisation of Māori astronomy and practices, that can have quite a profound effect on many launching payloads. But the other side of that is because it's such a massive industry, it actually makes up a significant amount of our GDP.
Yes.
So there's this commercial driver to keep unregulated growth in this golden age of space exploration. But I really wanted to ask a question if we've got time. around how you communicate the importance of having a relationship with the sky to different audiences. Because all I need to say to some of my pupils back home is they call it astrocolonialism. It's like, have they no knowledge of history? You're going to go colonize the astro? You know, when put in the context of the colonization of our people's lands and waters and now the sky, like they get that pretty quickly. But what's worked within your work in terms of communicating the importance and the impacts to industry versus general public versus Indigenous peoples? Because we often get put in this juxtaposition of this high-tech industry where we're not even imagined existing, and us kind of positioned within the past within our astronomies as opposed to a part of a flourishing future.
Yeah, it's the industry, I think, is the hardest one of communicating. A lot of the public workshops that we do tend to be like, you know, people find out. Just the question was kind of how do we go about communicating and getting things across in different groups. The public kind of gets it pretty quickly from our experience, but I think that's as well like the communities that we engage with here in Melbourne probably stem from our own communities and our own friends, and from that, and it's a bit of a quite an active group of people. So people who are kind of engaged in so decolonial work. Anyway, but the industry is really difficult to kind of like unpack because, saying astrocolonialism to them, they're like, that's what we're doing.
It's great, isn't it?
Whereas, you know, for Māori, it's very different, and First Nations here, it's like, you know, all the shit with that.
However, in saying that, if you don't mind, one of the really fruitful things has been connecting with other groups of people, organizations, institutes who are in their own ways trying to do the same things. I'm not sure if you already mentioned it, but there are many professionals in the industry who are either doing research or working on policy and law to try and implement some things or have some conversations. And so there is a community within the industry, and that always feels really reassuring, that there are people who have been in this sector for quite some time, are in quite established positions, and are working really hard, to do things along the similar train. So
that's actually such an important question, and that's something that we found the past 2 years is just like, even like some people will see what we're talking about our work and being like, oh my God, I've been thinking about this, but haven't necessarily had people to talk to about it. And then just like establishing a bit of a network across the world in the space industry of people doing similar things and starting to sort of work together, even just bounce ideas off each other, but also knowing that we'll support one another because these are scary industries. But in terms of maybe the space education in an industry setting is like what has been the hardest, I think, to try and get people to understand. And the way in which we have been going about it is deconstructing narratives and really taking it right back of like, where do these terms actually come from and what are their histories and how have they affected First Nations people, and kind of really doing that back work, and then bringing in sort of the futurisms part of like, it doesn't have to be this way. Now let's like even bringing in creative play and doing things like, how do we imagine different futures that are more like, you know, aligned with your cultures and aligned with your values?
Which makes me think about not my experiences here in Australia, because I haven't been here for very long, but when I was trying to communicate this kind of stuff to people when I was in France and in the UK, the best way I could get into industry was contacting people who are discriminated against typically. And they are always my way into like industry. They have their own communities, people who are also equally always typically discriminated groups. And I don't know, it's been helpful for passing like pollution acts in France and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. That resonates with my experience as well. Are you in contact with the Sustainable Space Institute at Auckland Uni? Bianca or Lena Henry?
No.
Okay, because we did we're working on writing up some of our surveys on experiences at Mahia.
Okay. Oh, really?
So we should
Oh,
talk
that's
after.
bad.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
We got 2 minutes, so. Yeah.
On that note, I think we'll finish up now, and then for those who want to carry on the conversation, we'll go to Uni House as a normal Friday thing, which I think is only gonna happen for another few weeks because once the semester shuts down or university stops for Christmas, Uni House is not gonna be there anymore until
Really?
late next year. They're renovating the whole, gutting and renovating the whole thing.
We're moving to the side or something then?
That or Woodward or something. This conversation's been going on for months. I'm sure we'll continue it on this evening. All right.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, if anybody wants free food, there is a large conference over in Northwest, which listed as an obscene amount of leftover food.
Oh, well, free food, let's go.
And they look like, when I went over, that's not quite as bad as yesterday, but there was really a lot of leftover fine food. We'll also probably still be there when you leave Uni House, but.
Right. It'll just be a little bit stale.
If you haven't any dinner plans,
All right.
then